Now, we're looking at this passage, the treaty at Beersheba, or Beersheba. In Hebrew, it's Beersheba. And that word means oath of the seven or oath of the well. The Hebrew root is capable of both. That Sheba or Sheba in Beersheba is from the Hebrew word for seven. We get our word Shabbat or Sabbath from that. So that's why Abraham puts aside seven animals there to sort of mark out that this covenant has been made. Now, this is, let me read the text for you and just give you a little bit of background as to what is going on here. Okay. Again, this is Genesis 21, 22 to 34. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, said to Abraham, God is with you in everything you do. Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. You know, like you did before in Genesis 20. Remember that? Okay. Show to me and the country where you now reside as a foreigner the same kindness I have shown to you. Abraham said, I swear it. Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. But Abimelech said, I don't know who has done this. You didn't tell me, and I heard about it only today. So Abraham brought sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a treaty. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs from the flock, and Abimelech asked him, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart for yourselves? Remember, well of the 7. He replied, accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I dug this well. Okay, talk about that more in a minute. So the place was called Beersheba because the two men swore an oath there. After the treaty had been made at Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord, the eternal God. And Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. Now, a little bit of context, okay? I love this quote from Gordon Wenham. Gordon Wenham is the author of the 2-volume Word Biblical Commentary on Genesis. Very thorough, very helpful. And he makes this statement. He says, the life of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, was not made up of only excitement and crisis. Who doesn't like excitement, right? Who doesn't like crisis? I don't, right? As in most people's lives, there were long periods of fairly humdrum activity of quiet pastoral and family life. In other words, most of what happened in the lives of the patriarchs was neither exciting nor of a crisis nature. It was just average day-to-day, go to work, do what you got to do, fix a meal, do what you got to do to keep body and soul together, get a good night's sleep, pretty much, all right? This short story gives a glimpse of the more mundane side of patriarchal experience. All right, so in other words, this is neither going to be an exciting sermon nor a crisis of a sermon today. It's going to be just a regular commentary. My wife and I had a very interesting week this week on a lot of levels. First of all, we had Decaloris last weekend, which was great. We had a great time. And I think Sunday I went to bed right away when I got home, not long after. And then I had to get up and sub for 5 days a week. So I was up every morning, up at 6 and doing all that sort of stuff, which is fine. I'm not looking for pity. But on Wednesday of last week, we were just sitting there and our doorbell rang. Okay. I knew it wasn't our neighbor because our neighbor, it was like ding dong, and when it's our neighbor, it's always ding dong, for some reason. It's like, okay, I hear you, okay? But this didn't do that. So I said, well, it's somebody else. So sometimes it's, a package being delivered or whatever. Sometimes some of the people that like USPS, they drop something off. They ring the doorbell and they just take off, let you know that it's there. Okay. So I opened the door and there's a gentleman standing there who was approximately my age, and I recognized him right away because several months ago, last fall, I was jogging through our subdivision and he was driving toward me and he pulled over and he opened his window and he said, explained to me that he and his wife were looking around. They had a house, and they had 4 children who are now adults and had moved out, and so they were looking to downsize, essentially. And he said, "Do you live in this subdivision?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Do you know of any units here that are available for sale?" And I said, "Well, there very well could be, but we're not allowed to, because we have one of those HOAs things, the Stepford condos kind of situation." Thank you for those of you that got that, okay? And I said, "But you can call," and I gave him the contact information for our homeowners association, and I said, "Call them and see what they say." Okay, fine. That was months ago. And then Wednesday, the doorbell rings. And, oh, hi. And he wanted to know if Nancy and I were interested in selling our condo. And it's funny because I had just talked to a class of students literally the day before. We were discussing economics. And I said, "What is a house worth?" And they said, "Well, our house is," and I said, No. What is a house worth? A house is worth whatever someone is willing to pay for it. Your house is for sale if the price is right. All right? If the price is right. And I just happened to tell the students, I said, "Now, do I want to sell our condo? No. If someone showed up at my door and offered me $500,000 for it, would I sell? In a heartbeat. Okay? In a heartbeat, I would." So anyway, we talked about it, and we mentioned a ballpark figure. I mentioned a ballpark figure. In the next, and he said, "Well, let me talk to my wife." And then he called me back. He said, "Can we maybe come over tomorrow and look at your place?" I said, "Okay." So, mad scramble, cleaning, putting things away, all that sort of stuff. That wasn't that bad, but just a few things that we had to do. And so they show up, and we did a little research in the meantime to see what our condo would sell for. I'm like, wow. Yeah, I didn't know that it would, we went to eventually Nancy went to 3 different websites that all listed it significantly higher sale there than I would have expected. Right? So they came over the next day, and then we told them, we said, "Well, here's our minimum," right? And they were a little taken back by that, and I just read their body language and all that sort of stuff as we were sitting at the table. And they said, "Well, we'll discuss it and we'll call you back." I said, "Okay," and closed the door. And I said, "They're not going to buy it. Okay, that was too much." Okay, so we talked about it. We did some more research, and I came home from subbing on Friday afternoon, and I said, "I can't do this. I just And she was excited at the prospect of, we could sell it, and we could get an apartment for a while, and we could move all our stuff, and we could downsize. And I'm like, no. I'm not into it, okay? So she's got the excitement. I'm thinking crisis. All right? Now, we had a really good conversation Friday afternoon after I got home, and I just said, "This is freaking me out," okay? Because it was. Anyway, we talked about it, and we decided that we would not want to sell right now. So I called. You ever have one of those times when you have to call somebody and talk to them and tell them something, and you call up, and the phone's ringing, and you say, go to voicemail, go to voicemail, go to voicemail, please go to voicemail. Okay? That's what happened, and I left a voicemail. Now, we went out to dinner because we needed to. A lot of times on Friday night we do that anyway. So we went out to dinner, and during dinner he called. And so do I answer the phone or let it go voice? So I answered the phone, and he was extremely gracious, and he said, "I understand. Thank you for all the trouble you went to," and all that sort of stuff. So bottom line is, we are not selling our condo yet, unless one of you wants to offer me $500,000 or more for it. Then I would definitely be interested. Thankfully, we don't have very many 48-hour periods that are like that. And Nancy and I have always said that whenever God puts us in a situation, God has either, over our life together, 44 years, 3 weeks, and 2 days now, okay? But who's counting, okay? God has either opened the door, shoved us through, slammed it behind us, and bolted it shut, or he has just slammed it in our face. Now, sometimes when he ultimately slams the door in our face, we think for a little bit that maybe this is the door we're supposed to go through. And so we start taking a couple steps and then slam. Nope, guess not, okay? So, again, excitement for her for the most part, crisis for me for the most part, although I have to admit it was an intriguing, but we spent Friday afternoon driving around looking at other complexes, someplace we could live, whatever. And our situation is such that we're both going to be firmly rooted in Grand Rapids with a lot of things. But so to move up here for a year-round thing just wouldn't work. So anyway, so we did all that. So what we're looking at today is just a regular, mundane, average type of day. Right? Now, what do we see here? Well, we've got a couple things happening. Okay. First of all, we've already looked at Genesis 21, the first 7 verses, which is the birth of Isaac, which is a miracle. Exciting time, a time commemorated by laughter, joyous laughter after the birth of Isaac, Yitzhak, right? It's a Hebrew word, whose name means laughter, okay, or he will laugh. And then you've got, the irony of that is that both Abraham and Sarah laughed at the idea, scoffingly at the idea, that she could have a child. Well, they got through that, and then, of course, the whole thing with Ishmael, and God differentiates, Ishmael, he talks to Hagar. Ishmael's going to do this, and he's going to do that, but he's not the one. It's Isaac who is, through whom the promise is to come. Okay, all right, so we have that sort of exciting, interesting time. Then, next Sunday, Lord willing, we're going to look at another episode, and that is when God comes to Abraham and says, I want you to take your son, your only son Isaac, and take him up to Mount Horeb, and offer him as a sacrifice. What? That doesn't even make sense. What are you doing? What is the Lord doing here? Now, we know what he was doing eventually, but it doesn't help us deal with the shock of this, all right? What must have been the shock of this for Abraham. So you've got that situation going on, right? So God, of course, God provides, and Jehovah Jireh means God provides, and God's going to provide a lamb, and all that sort of stuff. All right, so you've got excitement in chapter 21, you've got a crisis in chapter 22, but in the end of the end part of chapter 21, you've got a humdrum activity of quiet pastoral family life or mundane. Right? Now, what is it that's going on here? Okay, well, we've had our share of challenges here at First Baptist in 2022, right? When I see those numbers, I cannot believe it's 2022. I thought 2020 would never get here, and then when it did, I wish it never had. I walk around the high schools where I sub, and I see students with jackets that say 25 on the shoulder, i.e. 2025. Which means that these are freshmen who are going to graduate from high school in 3 years. I remember many, many years ago when I was walking through the mall and I saw a young lady who had a varsity jacket on, and on the sleeve it was double zeros. And I thought, 00, what's that? Is that her number? That she's an athlete? Then I realized, no, that's 2000. 2000. I couldn't even imagine the year 2000. My students now that I have, and even college students that I have, a lot of them, 9/11 was ancient history to them. They weren't even born when that happened, right? So, what is it that's going on here? Let's take a look at what's in this passage, because it's an interesting story. There's some interesting dynamics going on. Now, we need to remember that this encounter, or an encounter with Abraham and Abimelech, happened in chapter 20, right? This is when Abraham lies about his wife, saying she's his sister. And when he tells her, now, if you love me, you'll do this. Everywhere we go, everywhere they went, he told them that Sarah was not his wife, but she was his sister, so that he would then be treated kindly and generously. The whole dowry thing with the big brother and all that sort of stuff. And, of course, that was problematic. Right? So what happens here? Now, we've had a challenging year, okay, as I said. I've been thinking more recently, there was a movie that was on, oh, yes, God is present even in the humdrum, right? Again, this is what the book of Esther is all about. You read the book of Esther, and you will not see the name of God mentioned anywhere in the book of Esther at all. And you will not see prayer mentioned in the book of Esther. But God is there, right? I was talking to, I was sitting at the dinner table, And Don Gusta was talking to someone, he was just the 3 or 4 people down the table. And he made the comment, he said, maybe it's just me. And I don't know what exactly they were talking about, but he said, maybe it's just me, but he said, I've looked in my concordance, I've never found the word coincidence in the Bible. Okay? So I had a little fun. I walked up to him and I said, I heard you mention that you'd never seen the word coincidence in the Bible. And I said, actually it is, sort of, but it also isn't. I said, because if you go to the book of Ruth, when Ruth and Naomi arrived back in Israel, and everybody's, oh, look, it's Naomi, it's Ruth, blah, blah, blah. And Naomi, Ruth offers to go and glean, which was it's a whole other little lecture of itself, that you can pick up where the field has been harvested, and there's all sorts of grain there, and the poor are allowed to come on your property and take that and use it, all right? And it says, this is where the coincidence things come in. It says that, so Ruth went out to glean in the field, and it just so happened that she went to the field of Boaz, okay? It just so happened, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, okay? So it looks like a coincidence, but it's really not. So even when things happen to us that look like coincidences, they really aren't. There's more to them. God is at work in the midst. We like it when God is at work in big, super, giant, bombastic ways. Right? I would have liked it if God had boomed a voice from heaven about Friday afternoon and said, either sell the condo or don't sell the condo, right? One way or the other. I don't like, why can't life be simpler, Seriously, that's the way it goes. Any rate, so this was a movie that was very popular a number of years ago, 4 Weddings and a Funeral, okay? You know what we just had here at First Baptist? We had 4 funerals and a wedding. Think about that. That is not mundane stuff, okay? Well, we can at least agree on the wedding part, right? It's not mundane stuff. Busy, all that sort of stuff. What we have here between Abraham and Abimelech, and if you had been standing there listening to the conversation they had, I think you would have thought to yourself, this is a little awkward. Okay? A little awkward, right? First of all, God gave Abraham a second chance, as it were, in his relationship with Abimelech. Relationship such as it was. I don't even know. They were sort of in each other's way. They were sort of in each other's ballpark. And so they had to deal with each other. You sort of have this with the servants of Abraham and the servants of Lot. They were doing things and they just had problems getting along given the space and logistics that they were in. So God gives Abraham a second chance, as it were, in his relationship with Abimelech. Aren't you glad when God gives you a second chance? Now, I'm not sure that Abraham was the most stellar in terms of his response to the situation. But at any rate, so chapter 21, verse 22, it says, at that time Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of the forces, said to Abraham, God is with you in everything you do. Now you notice this isn't Abimelech by himself. He's got this guy named Phicol, who is the head of his army. Do you think that Abimelech brought reinforcements? Of some sort, I think he did. Why would he do that? Well, we know that Abraham had a sizable camp of people. Right? Remember the story in Genesis 14 when he goes up to rescue Lot, and he takes 318 trained servants from his house. I bet you don't have 318 trained servants in your house. But that's just young men who could fight. Think of the women that would do all the things that they did, and the other men. There were probably 1,000 or 2,000 people. This is not just an old man and old woman walking along with canes, okay? No, Val, I did not have a cane this morning. We had that conversation, remember? I came out and I was holding this little, kind of like a lanyard for my flash drive, and at first glance, Val thought it was a cane. I said, no, not yet, not yet. That day's come, but not now, right? So this was a huge, so Abimelech knew he was going to be in the minority, and he probably took Phicol with him to say, okay. So Did Abraham trust Abimelech? Did Abimelech trust Abraham? Not really, not fully, not in a healthy way. Okay. Second, and unfortunately, it is Abimelech who sets the terms for that second chance. In other words, it's not Abraham. Okay. Verses 23 and 24. Now swear to me, Abimelech says. Now swear to me before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Why? Because that's what he did back in chapter 20. And he says, with my children or my descendants, the New Living Translation says grandchildren. Why? Because what had happened before. Remember all the women in Abimelech's family house, they couldn't bear children. And Abimelech is saying, I don't want to repeat of what happened before. He says in verse 23, now swear to me before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me in the country where you now reside as a foreigner the same kindness I have shown to you. Right? All right. So what does Abraham do? Well, he responds, and let me go back here, okay? What does Abraham say? He says, I swear, okay? I promise. Commentators have noted that the response of Abraham is quite terse, okay? Is Abraham upset? Don't know. Is he afraid? Don't know. I mean, you got this Abimelech guy shows up, and he's got the general of his army standing there, and he says, hey, I need you to make a promise to me. Right? His response is terse, and he immediately complains, all right? So there's none of this response on the part of Abraham that's like, oh, yes, sure, that's great. You know, I'm really sorry about what happened before. Let's see if we can, fix things and all that sort of stuff. No, there's not that. Okay? Instead, Abraham uses this as an opportunity to complain about us. And again, it's a legitimate complaint. Excuse me. It's a legitimate complaint, but it's still kind of an interesting timing with this thing. Okay? Verse 24. He says in verse 23, show to me in the country where you now reside as a foreigner the same kindness I have shown to you. Abraham said, I swear it. Okay? Okay, all right. Verse 25. Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. All right? This was not uncommon. Right? We are blessed in this country, in this culture, in this society with running water. Think about in the full, time range of human history. Think of how many people had running water. Besides the really rich people had lots of servants, and they could say, go run and get me some water, right? That's about it. So a well, that's very important. By the way, one of the things that's interesting about this is Abraham digs a well, and the servants, some of the servants of Abimelech, and again, he probably had a lot, seized it, and he's upset about that. Now, what we'll see later with Isaac is Isaac built a well, and some people seized it, so he moved on. He dug another well, and some other people seized it and took it as their own. So he moved on and dug a third well, and nobody took that one, so he was okay. That's a little bit of the difference between Abraham and Isaac. Like father, like son? No, not at all, all right? Sometimes that happens, but a lot of times it doesn't. All right, so what's the situation here? Okay, in verse 25, Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. But Abimelech said, I don't know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I heard about it only today. I'm inclined to believe Abimelech on this. I think he's telling the truth. The accuracy of the Bible and it only extends to the fact that that's what the people said. To me, it's like Peter when Peter is told in Acts 10, when Peter is told by the Lord, when he sees this vision of these animals, all kinds of animals being let down on a sheet. He sees it 3 times. And the sheet comes down with all the animals, and the Lord says, arise, Peter, kill and eat. And Peter says, oh, not so, Lord, because I've never eaten anything common or unclean. I believe Peter said that, Whether he was telling the truth or not, I don't know. I mean, show me a Jew in the first century who probably at some point hasn't been hungry enough that he didn't eat kosher. And I think that's very possible. But again, the Bible records accurately what the people said. It doesn't necessarily mean that what they said was true for them. Does that make sense? Okay. Not only that denies the authority of Scripture. All right, so Abimelech, I think, is being transparent and honest. I did not know about this. I've not even heard about it till today. And again, depending on how many servants you've got, right? I mean, there's always going to be a handful that are difficult to control. I had a subbing opportunity this past week where I had 3 students that I had to deal with over and above the usual sort of thing, you know. Now, it's a school that I love going to. I really do. But I had 3 students that I had to deal with, and I had to sort of confront them. And I informed their teacher, sent the teacher an email and said, here's what happened, and all that sort of stuff. Now, do I love the school? Yes. I've had no, and I've often said, I don't have any problems here. I said, every once in a while, a student, 1 or 2 students might give me a little bit of a hard time. Nothing I can't handle. That's kind of what's going on here. We need not believe that all of Abimelech's servants were dishonest thieves. But when you have as many servants as he probably did, you probably have a handful. It's just inevitable. Now, what did Abimelech do about this? Did he deal with it? We don't know. We're not told. So the story then continues. So Abraham initiates what I call a 7 ewe lamb ceremony, or primarily or exclusively to protect his well. Now here, this is like, I read this, I'm like, Abe, you were doing so good when you started to say this. But then, not so much. Right? So verses 27 to 30, all right? So Abraham complains about the well of water being taken. Abimelech says, I didn't know about it. I had nothing to do with it. You didn't tell me. This is the first I've heard about it. Okay, so communication has taken place here. Verse 27, so Abraham brought sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech, and the 2 men made a treaty, right? Remember, this happens all the time. This is the sort of thing that happens in this kind of culture a lot. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs from the flock, and Abimelech asked Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs you have set apart by themselves? The idea is that Abraham is going over and above what's required. And he's doing even more than what is required. And I'm just ready for that to be, Abraham to say, I'm sorry, about what happened before, and I don't want this to happen again, so I'm going to go even above and beyond the normal expectations of the treaty. But notice what he says. He replied, accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I dug this well. You know what he's saying? He's saying, I still don't trust you. I don't trust you. I don't trust your people. Oh. I think a golden opportunity for Abraham to step up and say, yeah, okay, here you go. First of all, he initiates the animals. He makes, remember when in Genesis 20, when Abraham left Abimelech gave him a whole bunch of stuff as he left. And so Abraham is sort of returning the favor here, but it's not like that's the main purpose. It's, this is going to remind, don't ever forget, when you see these 7 ewe lambs and all the lambs that they have and all the lambs that they then have, that this was to make sure that you let me keep my well. I don't think he trusted him. Okay? So, final point is Abimelech and Abraham swear an oath at Beersheba, and then they go their separate ways. There's a little glimmer of hope here in this final section. Verse 31, so the place was called Beersheba because the 2 men swore an oath there. Remember, Beersheba means either oath of 7 or oath of a well. It could be translated either way. Now, if you remember, Beersheba is historical for the fact that Dan, the tribe of Dan, during the time of the judges, migrates to the north, and Beersheba is the city that's in the south. So the expression, when Samuel, for instance, Samuel becomes a prophet of God, and we're told that all Israel, his words never fell to the ground, and everyone in Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was a prophet of God. Right? It's sort of like saying from Maine to California, right? The full span of the country. It's a lot less. It's about 130, 140 miles from Dan to Beersheba, but it's still, that's a major marking point for the geography of Palestine. So the place was called Beersheba because the two men swore an oath there. After the treaty had been made at Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, returned to the land of the Philistines. So Abimelech has come. Nothing has happened here in terms of a relationship. It's just, okay, it's like Jacob and Laban, right? The Mizpah thing, the Lord watch between me and you. Remember that? When the story of Jacob and the story of his uncle Laban, they don't trust each other, so they set up a covenant of sorts, which is the Lord watch between me and you. Right? That sounds so pious, doesn't it? Oh, the Lord watch between. That's not what it is. It's, okay? It's like, Paul, I don't trust you, and you don't trust me, so the Lord's going to watch you, and you're going to watch me, right? And have that sort of thing going on. I always thought it was interesting. They used to sell, I always still sell them anymore, these Mizpah medals, where you like a round medal that's cut in half, and the guy wears one, and the girl wears the other, and it's the Lord watch between me and you, You don't really realize what that text means, do you? Okay, or you probably wouldn't do that, right? Again, what's the key word? Context, right? Context, yes. All right. So that's a little bit of that going on here. Now look at the rest of the session, this passage. Verse 33. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord, the eternal God. Right? Now, he's going to be, in Genesis 22, he's going to be the God who provides, Jehovah Jireh. Here he is the eternal God. Abraham plants a tamarisk tree, and there he called upon the Lord, the eternal God. In other words, what he does essentially is he sets up an altar. It's interesting, Abraham does that. Not every Israelite does that. But for all of Abraham's shortcomings, okay, for all of his failures, he always, at the crucial time, he builds an altar to God and calls upon the name of the Lord. That's a good thing to do when you come through a crisis. Maybe you've not made the wisest decisions. Maybe you haven't had the best attitude. It's clear to me from this passage that Abraham is looking out for numero uno, right? As I told you, when we studied chapter 20, I was really impressed with Abimelech. I mean, Abimelech was, like I said, who's the bad guy here? Abraham or Abimelech? Look in chapter 20. It's clearly not Abimelech. Well, the relationship is even a little bit more chilly, I think, here, because Abimelech and Phicol leave and they go to their place, but Abraham at least plants a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he calls on the name of the Lord, the eternal God. And then we're told that Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. Now, that's interesting because that's where Abimelech is, but they're in different parts of the territory. So, does Abraham come off looking really good in this? No. But there's a glimmer of hope because he calls upon the name of the Lord. That's something you and I can always do. Even when we think we've kind of messed things up a little bit, we can always call upon the name of the Lord. Lord, I need you. I need your help. I need your guidance. All right? So I was thinking this weekend, all right, I want to call on, Lord, what do you want us to do? We've said before, I'm 66. Actually, I was reminded by a former student of mine who is in financial planning, oh, by the way, happy half birthday. So it wasn't just enough to be 66. I had to be reminded I was 66 and a half. Right? I remember a little girl told me once, many years ago, I said, how old are you? And she says, I'm 4 and a half. I said, oh, I'm 52 and a half. And she looked at me like I was a crazy old man, because I kind of was and kind of still am. But at any rate, so you have these opportunities. And so my thinking is, okay, Lord, what do you want us to do? My thought is about 4 more years, and then God, I think, will call us to ride off into the sunset, somewhere warm, all right? But I don't know that. I mean, who knows what the future is going to bring. But I want to call upon the name of the Lord when I'm uncertain about the future. It's sad in a way, I think, that Abraham didn't do that until after this whole situation had transpired. He doesn't look very good here, and Abimelech looks all right, but he's looked better. So when you look at this event from the life of Abraham, you learn a lot. Now, we're going to see next Sunday, Lord willing, we're going to see Abraham go through the worst thing that you can imagine a father going through. And we'll analyze that, and the book of Hebrews commends him for his faith, right? So, they go their separate ways. Like I said, very mundane story, isn't it? Not an edge-of-your-seat thriller sort of thing, just like, okay. But I think there's a lot of things we can learn about this, from this. Let's pray.